We have two guests, now teammates, Eric Larsen from Candid Design and Owen Dalton from the Clarient Group. We're going to talk about how those organizations have come together.
We're founded in 1945. We've added a lot of other different parts and pieces. And of course, yes, the most recent is the Clarient Group. In 2020, we merged with a consulting group called Blue Cottage.
Part of this strategic merger is let's bring this process that has already been developed and let's fold that into the teams that are doing that really well right now. This group, we're going to tie some of the threads of Candid Design together. The front end planning of Blue Cottage, and then mature nature of the capital project with Candid. That link between the two doesn't just happen out of nowhere. While Blue Cottage has been there today, we've seen the need for middle breed sort of between the two to bridge those user requirements, the business consulting, but add that technology roadmap, the requirements, the technical side of how that vision would be supported is sort of that missing link.
We're back with another episode of The Down Low with Joe, here with Lewis Martin, my co-host. And we have a special episode. We have two guests, now teammates, Eric Larsen from Candid Design and Owen Dalton from the Clarient Group. And we're going to talk about how those organizations have come together and what that means moving forward. So Eric and Owen, why don't we go first to Eric and just give us a quick introduction to yourself and your background.
Awesome. Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Lewis. Long-time listener, first-time caller, and a little bit of background on myself. So I've been in smart buildings for over 10 years now. I have a mechanical engineering degree from NC State, but then unsurprisingly to those of you who know me, I went into more of a technical sales role because I'm definitely a people person. I started with Schneider Electric, worked in the electrical side of things on the Square D side, and then migrated over to BMS, where I learned all about smart buildings. So since then, I've worked with a number of smart building consulting groups and the manufacturers as well, and landed at Candid Design about a year and a half ago, really to help try to start and grow a smart buildings practice. And it's been a really exciting year and a half. Excited to dig more into what Candid Design is all about and talk a little bit about what Owen brings to the table as well.
That's great. Owen, we'd love to hear a little bit about your background too.
Sure. Thanks for having me here. Great to see you guys again. Owen Dalton. I'm a smart building consultant. I had come up through architectural engineering in school. So I studied lighting design and electrical engineering. And then got my first job at Candid Design, actually. Worked there for 6 years as a lighting designer and electrical engineer, and actually ended up spearheading the first AMP program, which we'll get into, that was all geared towards launching a smart building service. Eventually found my way over to the Clarient Group, where I've been working for the last 4 years, and excited to be rejoined with Candid Design today. So yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, it's funny how this is a big industry and that there's a lot of players, there's a lot of people who work in the industry, but it's actually, like a lot of industries, a pretty tight-knit group. And the fact that, Owen, you used to work at Candid Design, then to Clarient, now you're back together, that's actually not that surprising. I can't think of a good example, but it's happened. I'm sure it's happened quite a bit. Maybe just for the listeners who have heard of either of these organizations but don't really know exactly what you're all about, Eric, maybe we start with you on the Candid Design side and just tell us more about the organization.
Yeah, happy to. So we're founded in 1945. So Candid Design's been around a long time. We're coming up on 1,300 people. We have just about 20 offices across the country, and Canada and India as well. So a big group, a very established architecture and engineering group. It was founded by two brothers, and one was an architect and one was an engineer. So from the get-go, we've been an integrated design firm representing both of those sides. And since, we've added a lot of other different parts and pieces. And of course, yes, the most recent is the Clarient Group. But a little more background. In 2020, we merged with a consulting group called Blue Cottage, which was expanding beyond AE into general consulting. And they have kind of a background in healthcare operations and experience design, but have expanded from there to also include education and commercial services, and our team's working really closely with them. But just generally speaking, Candid Design's a very innovative company. We have a very entrepreneurial spirit across everyone I've talked to. Ton of incredible people at this company, and we've been named Fast Company's most innovative workplace for innovators in 2024, and a couple of different awards. So a group with a big vision and a lot of people that are all aligned to get there. So yeah, like I said, it's been about 2 years, and that's Canon Design.
Yeah, it's great working across different asset classes and kind of adopter of technology. I know we've talked a little bit about some of the tools you've adopted. Well, I'm sure we'll get into that. Oh, Owen, what about you on the Clarient Group side?
Yeah, so the Clarient Group is a standalone consultant. I would call them, call ourselves a specialty consultant focusing on historically complex network, telecom, communication, sort of AV, more your traditional systems that support communication in a building. But over the course of the company's trajectory, complex projects, end user experience has really started to drive the direction, and that's where system integration started to really become sort of a core capability. And where we sit today is we have kind of two groups. One that's a smart building consulting group, helping vision and strategize on sort of the art of the possible, and then overseeing that through design and construction and implementation, et cetera. And then that's supported with traditional sort of AVIT, structured cabling, network design engineers that have still maintained that sort of core identity. So both of these two pieces of the service is obviously why Canon Design and the Clarion were attracted to each other.
Yeah, and you're both. I guess what I heard, but correct me if I'm wrong. You're both a little more focused on design, construction, on that phase of the life cycle of a building. There's obviously a lot you can do, and in some cases have done in what I would more, you know, eloquently say is the use phase of the building, right? The building is open and uh, occupied. People are using it. Is that the right way to think about it? Obviously, that life cycle of a building, there are different sector segments, and there are companies that focus on one, but you kind of started on the we help you design and deploy or deliver the office or the building you want. But now that's extending into, well, we also can help you on the ongoing use of that building.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's where we've been the most sticky in our, implementations, and then
Yeah,
catching services on the back end of change management, activation, working through sort of scaling a program, beyond just the pilot phase, and
yeah,
taking that. Part of that has also been not necessarily being tied to just the capital project. So, being contracted directly to the owner, or the
yeah.
operator, and kind of sitting outside of any one big construction project has allowed us to, go with them on that management journey.
Right, right, right. And then also, I think one of the other themes that you noted was expansion. Oh, and you mentioned telecom, communication, structured cabling. I mean, a big part of making a building work, but not the only part, right? There's a lot of base building systems, over a dozen really. And you kind of expanded, both of your organizations, I think, have kind of expanded from the core to a lot of systems. And obviously, there's a lot of convergence starting to happen in those systems.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times people think, we get called in, or, historically been called in at the beginning to say, what's a smart building, right? What can I do?
Yeah,
And a lot of times, people think they need all this tech that they don't have, right? And the reality is, we're actually putting these pieces together, working with the majority of systems you have today, right? We help go through this process where you vision what's possible, but then you kind of cross reference that with all the things that you have, right? And then we circle, what's the low hanging fruit? What's going to bring you the most value, aligned with your goals based on what you have today, right? And so I think some of that acknowledgement that we're not necessarily doing anything wildly different, we're just connecting the dots.
yeah, it's a great point. I think talking through smart buildings and how you see that world is great. But before we get there, the big news, maybe the event or the noteworthy item that was really the driver for us to have you on quickly and soon on the podcast was just the two organizations have merged together. Eric, you mentioned kind of a history of some strategic M&A on the part of Canon, but I would love for maybe both of you, one of you, to just talk through bringing these organizations together, the strategic rationale there, whatever you're willing to share, and just what that looks like moving forward.
Yeah, I can start it off. It's kind of an interesting story from the Clarient Group side as well. Owen's mentioned he started at Canon. But to set the picture, so Canon Design has an internal incubator that's called AMP, and that program has been super successful to date. But the first program actually was called, Canon Design Integration Services. So there was this
Mhm.
idea for integration and smart buildings that was, a number of years ago, and that was something that the AMP program, which is an initiative from the core team, our leadership, approved to move forward, and something that's been kind of bubbling in the background for a number of years. And in that time, we've done a ton of other things with technology. It's a core competency, I would say, for Canon Design moving forward. We've stood up a very capable and interesting technology team that looks at design technology and is starting to look at some digital twins, and actually created an internal AI chat tool as well. So we've always been focused on technology and looking to the future, and looking to diversify from just being architecture and engineering to being more, you know, offering full services across the building lifecycle, which you touched on earlier, Joe. So all of that kind of set the table for the smart building strategic, some sort of acquisition or merger. And I joined Canon about 2 years ago. We had a smart building summit, and we brought all these groups together. We brought the technology team I just mentioned, we brought engineering, we brought architecture, and we brought a couple of other groups, including Blue Cottage as well. And so that kind of laid the framework for what would end up being the merger with the Clarient Group. So I'll pass to Owen to kind of finish off his side of the story.
Yeah. There's definitely a personal touch to this just because of, playing both sides of it. But as Eric mentioned, that the AMP incubator was definitely the springboard for ultimately what's been realized in this M&A. Back then, smart buildings were just coming up. Everyone's understanding of what they were and how they would be supported and served was still kind of formulating. Um, as a part of my role at that time was in similar shoes to Eric, kind of, working on how this thing's going to launch, right? Blue Cottage was the catalyst that took Canon from A&E to now anything is possible, because we have a really well-respected group of healthcare consultants that can lead that strategy conversation. They can capture back end change management, and it started to unveil the model, back to the contracting piece, as I was talking about, that we don't need to be tied to a capital project. We don't need to be tied
Mhm.
to the the general contractor and the typical construction delivery to do this work. And actually, we might be more successful if we intentionally break from that model, right? And we deliver in more of that consultancy style service. Um, so yeah, that was kind of the pitch back then. There was a lot of activity over, between 2020 and now, just in terms of that M&A, the real estate market, and commercial construction, et cetera. So
Yeah.
uh, that's where, from an incubation standpoint, Canon was still working through it all. And then
Yeah.
the Clarient Group was, a firm that had been doing the work, right? On paper, this internal incubator was drawn up as, um, really a smart building consultancy, right? Something that would sit as a third party reviewer to other engineers, designs, would help do some of that visioning work, and the Clarent Group was doing that work every day. So I was personally attracted to them, and started to get the experience lens. And then zoom forward, through industry engagements and regular touch points, and just a shared understanding of where both firms are trying to go. Conversations took off that, this was a nice fit. Obviously, there's some DNA that, kind of mixed
Yeah.
back and forth. There's another member on our team who served time at Canon as well, part of that whole effort. So there's a lot of crossbreeding just with the people. And
Yeah.
then, you know, basically it's take this well-oiled car that we built at the Clarient Group, this process, this structure for delivering this stuff in a boutique consultant manner. And now let's bring that back to the size, the scale, the market reach, and the resources that Canon has. And let's really extend that client journey.
Yeah. And you've worked you've worked together, you have some shared clients, I would assume. So there's it's not we didn't know each other and all of a sudden there was kind of maybe not a formal partnership, but there was some coordination between the two firms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think what's cool seeing acquisitions like this is you see a well represented brand like the Clarient Group, which again has great clients. I know a couple of them, but is a small firm compared to a Canon Design, and I think the cool thing about this is just the scalability that is going to be available now, not just across commercial real estate, but I'm sure Canon Design has all real estate assets or projects within their portfolio. From your side, Eric, how big was the technology focus or the smart building focus prior to this acquisition?
Yeah, great question. So it's like I said, it's been bubbling for years, right? But I came in and was the only person with the smart building consultant title, right? Like we were continuously pulling pieces from the other parts of our groups. And everyone kind of has the shared vision of what a smart building could look like. I think one thing that's important to mention is that Candid Design's ethos is called living centered design, and it's something that we've defined that's different than human centric design, but it really focuses on the people and how the people interact and how systems and spaces interact. And that's something that's really important to each and every employee at Canon Design. Um, so, having that shared vision allowed us to start talking about the smart buildings vision within that. And the piece that fits really nicely with the Clarient Group is it's the same vision. And honestly, it's a lot of the similar terminology that you guys have taught myself and taught others in the industry, and the Nexus Labs and all of that. So if we're talking about this vision of a smart building serving the people, it's really just about figuring out the processes and the technology to get there and the correct implementation process as well. So what Owen was talking about with the Clarient Group has 20 plus years of history under its belt serving these clients. It's that was most attractive to our team. So instead of me and a couple other people trying to pull like portions of people's time to head in the same direction, we've now got this huge accelerant, which is dedicated people, dedicated expertise, and a proven process. And so all of that was really just an accelerant to what we were doing already.
Yeah.
I know you talked about the acquisition maybe being useful for creating stickier client relationships across the cycle. In terms of where the Clarient Group then fits, because you see different acquisitions, which means different things. They can get rolled up into the business or continue to be a standalone business. What's the plan for the integration of the Clarient Group and how it's used? Because Canon Design's obviously a huge firm across, well, let's specifically say North America, but you could say globally as well. You can either sell internally or look at continuing to sell externally to new customers.
Yeah, great question. So the Clarient Group will remain as branded as the Clarient Group to the market. We will sit functionally outside of Canon Design in a very similar way to services like Blue Cottage. Back to sort of the recipe for the merger as well. The Blue Cottage came in 2020, and their scaling growth has gone very well. Right? They've received the resources of the firm, and the machine has started to take off. So that recipe has really served as sort of the blueprint to repeat that process again with the Clarient Group. Where I think it's a helpful differentiator is um, part of the vision is that this group that we're going to tie some of the threads of Canon Design together. So we've talked about sort of the front end planning of Blue Cottage. And then to Joe's conversation, the very, mature nature of the capital project with Canon, right?
Mhm.
But that link between the two, doesn't just happen out of nowhere, right? And while Blue Cottage has been there today, we've seen the need for a middle breed sort of between the two, to bridge those user requirements, the business consulting, but add that technology roadmap, the requirements, the technical side of how that vision would be supported is sort of that missing link. So functionally, where we'll sit is outside of Canon in a similar role to Blue Cottage or our facility optimization service. Like, it's a standalone business, but it's really meant to help link and integrate the different services within Canon. So that's kind of one side. The other is improving project delivery within Canon Design itself, right? So helping bring our tools and processes to the engineers, to the specialty services like lighting design and environmental graphics, and helping everyone start to talk in use cases and outcomes and experiences and start to use this common language and almost educate all these services across Canon into this is the way that we all should be talking about solutions. Then the right party will come in and solve that piece of the problem when their time is right.
One kind of one bigger question that I think you both touched on, but maybe just to ask it directly, the architectural, the design, the architectural, the engineering part of constructing a new building or doing a very significant capital project in a building, in a lot of cases, that's been fairly detached from the day-to-day ongoing operation of the building, which includes operating those systems, which includes a lot of other more maybe basic or less technical tasks, right? Trash pickup would be an example, custodial services, all things you have to do. And if you zoom out, there's a lot of different firms that support those different functions. I'm just interested in, and I've seen examples. I've talked to investors who say, "Well, we want to bridge the gap between design, construction, and operations." I think that's while a lot of different companies use digital twin as a kind of to their own, yeah, this is our digital twin versus this is a digital twin, but like that's maybe the most cohesive story you could say. We have all the data about how the building was built. We then want to operate the building. I'm just interested, without talking about specific technology necessarily, or just how do you see those worlds coming together? And is part of the goal here to bring them a little bit more together, at least with your clients and your future clients?
Yeah, it's a great question and a tricky subject, right? I think anytime you say digital twins, people's ears are going up and they're like, okay, what do you really mean by that? And I think the short answer to your question is like long term, we 1000% believe that we as the start of as helping design a new building are the start of this creation of data and creation of models. I want to bring that data into construction and into implementation as well. So the one thing to call out in that is that our design technology group and our digital products group, which are both looking at the new capabilities in programs like Revit and in even developing software as Canon Design ourselves. And on that point, we've created a software and rolled it out already. It's called FOSS, or Facility Optimization Solutions, and it's digitized
Mhm.
the facility condition assessment, or FCA, process. So those are the things that we're looking at holistically, and we've dipped our toes into digital twins as well, and we're looking at different solutions and keeping a pulse on the market and that kind of thing. So like long term, our goal is to smooth out that process for multiple reasons, right? I think we know the challenges right now of the gap between construction and implementation, and that loss of knowledge to get into operations and the lack of training for operators makes things really difficult. And you know at the end of the day, it means that what we've designed doesn't necessarily come to fruition. So just on a self-serving Canon basis, we want to have as much data at the end result as possible to inform our design and improve that cycle. But then, the second piece is that from a client stickiness perspective, and you could say, that's self-serving as well, for Canon Design to be more involved in future projects and campus planning and things like that. But it also benefits our customers for someone with knowledge of the buildings to stick around with the building for a few more years to inform, to help with that training, to help understand how the systems are used, all of that. So that is our goal. I won't say that we've got that solution day one. It's very, very tall task, but those are the things that we are definitely talking about internally, and part of what spurred this to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I mean the point about digital twin. I mean that was an example, right? I think we've all probably talked to companies that are doing things that are what we would perceive as close to a digital twin. Other companies that maybe aren't quite there, but they use that term. I've found that term. I'm hearing it much less, maybe over the past year and a half. Almost, Gen AI has taken over as that's what we really want to anchor on as a vendor. And in reality, I think these all have value to a building or the service solution providers to the building, but they're also big initiatives, right? It's not like this year we built our digital twin. It seems like it's a larger effort, unless you throw a lot of people at that. Um, but the other follow up question I had, just one of the points that you touched on in a few different ways, when you're talking to clients or even prospects, do you generally find a consistent definition of a smart building? Do you find that it varies by asset class? Do you find that we're still in the phase where, because I think maybe it was you, Eric, who said, well, somebody comes, tells her, maybe it was you, Owen, I forget now, but oh, they want a smart building. And like, does that always mean the same thing? Does that often not mean the same thing? That's maybe just a little bit of a temperature check on where do you see the market at today for deploying technology?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think there are kind of two flavors of an answer. One is folks are less concerned with, defining what a smart building is today. And like from a market maturity standpoint, there's definitely less customers asking, help us figure out what this thing is, and more customers
Yeah.
asking for a specific way or specific help in implementing this piece of their program as it relates to that. Right? So the maturity level has definitely, we've seen that mature. Now, there's still an element of, what does a smart building mean for you and your goals
Right.
as an organization? And that's where some of our toolkits and process and things like that have helped tailor that vision specifically for whatever group, has hired us on, right? So to one, it might mean something that's, employee experience and user focused and sort of all things elevating, the end user in the space. To another client, it might mean operationally, this is what I'm looking to get out of my building, and this is what I'm trying to do, right? So I would kind of put it in like two camps almost, like kind of experience for the user driven building, and then
Yeah.
really operationally tight machine.
Yeah, I'll actually play a little devil's advocate here because I think, Owen's last couple years at the Clarient Group, like those conversations start. They're a smart building consulting group, right? So someone comes in with some idea and is kind of already interested in the smart building topic, let's say. I think that, and I think this was really brought to light at NexusCon last year, like the small sliver of smart buildings in the large industries of real estate and construction is still tiny, right? So like we're going to Realcom in a couple of weeks, and there's a ton of thought leaders and people that have done some incredibly cool projects and have put a ton of time and thought into this from a smart buildings perspective. And I know we all appreciate that, and that's what keeps a lot of our businesses going, right? But if
Right.
you're thinking about the general state of the verticals of, healthcare and education and commercial, and you think about how many architecture and engineering projects are done on a day-to-day basis and how many are discussed and how many master plans are out there, the amount that technology is brought up in those very early conversations is still not where we think it should be. It's still a very low percentage, I would guess to say,
Yeah.
right? So I think a big part of our charge bringing the Clarient Group in is not it's of course to serve those forward thinking customers, but it's also to educate the customers that haven't necessarily thought about it yet. And it's to bring up technology in the SD phase, in the concept planning, in the master plan, even, and to bring up smart buildings, not just being Can we make sure that our data centers have enough racks to support the future, right? It's to
Yeah.
talk about the outcomes that you can get from the smart building and help prioritize them with the client. And frankly, there's a lot of internal and external education to say smart buildings aren't just IT and AV and structured cabling. It's
Right.
not just that technology part of MEPT. So there's a lot that we can do to help educate that part of the market that's not quite where, the four of us are used to talking.
Yeah, I would almost just go one step farther, but, like, the conversation about cost influence, Joe, is like where I think this kind of applies as well. Is we're seeing that wave of, cost influence be so early on, right? Um, we need to capture, these critical conversations, these requirements, hold space for the order of magnitude
Yeah.
that are going to matter up front. And part of this strategic merger is, let's bring this process that has already been developed and let's fold that into the teams that are doing that really well right now from an organizational consulting perspective. And let's arm them to actually, fold this into their process, right? Our visioning phase is going to look a little bit different, now that we have, the consulting arm of things sort of driving, right? We're going to make sure that the output of that feeds our needs as a group, and we can use those requirements and we can build on that and actually realize it. But let's let those folks who are doing that today really well just keep going, right? But to Eric's point, I think that's spot on. Like, these other verticals of healthcare, education, they're definitely a little bit less mature in sort of their understanding, or even that, vision of like what's possible.
Which sector would you say is more advanced in truly understanding what a smart building is to them, and perhaps even having implemented some of those ideas?
I can speak to healthcare because I've been on a number of projects recently. I think it's super interesting. So there's so much complicated technology in healthcare, and a lot of it is super advanced too. Um, they don't necessarily use the term smart building. And I think that's actually something we aspire to as well, right? The building should be built in a smart way. There's data coming from systems, and that data should be transferred to operations. Does that mean it's a smart building? Like, who's to say? So when you think about like an office building and someone who walks into work and has their phone as a way to interact with certain systems, there's still not a ton of control that you would give like the individual, right? On the opposite side, in healthcare, you've got a patient sitting in a room who, may not even be able to get out of bed very easily. The amount of technology that's even included in the bed that they're laying in. There's more and more technologies for the TV that they're watching. It's not just a TV. It's actually usually a camera mounted on top now to provide telehealth services so that they can there's another remote person that can communicate back and forth with them. And even that can allow for families to be shown on the screen as a doctor walks into a room, and a patient can have the doctor conversation supported by their family. I mean, there's so much complicated technology. And there's also these trends within healthcare of interoperable systems. There's government regulation that requires that patients that migrate from one hospital system to another actually keep the same type of records so that doctors can access them. So there's this theme of interoperability, this theme of technology development. I'm going to say the buzzword we're all thinking, but artificial intelligence has also seeped its way into many of these other healthcare technologies on an individual level. But I think that for the long term, talking about bringing that into operations, into back of house, into the facility room, and getting some of those systems incorporated, that part's still a little bit behind. There's a lot of attention put on the patient and not necessarily put on the operations. Long-winded answer for the healthcare
Yeah.
vertical.
No, this is great.
Well, healthcare. I mean, healthcare. I know from my time working at JCI 10 plus years ago. One, they're among the most complicated buildings. They spend probably the most on just the base building systems just to operate the hospital. I think the patient experience. It's interesting. A lot of articles have come out in the past years that say the office building will be more like um, a hospitality style relationship or just experience. And I was listening to a podcast a couple days ago with the CEO of Industrious. Industrious was acquired by CBRE, he was talking a lot about this, that we're just, while not saying necessarily hospitality, he probably did once or twice, but you could say hospitals have actually been there already, and they're oftentimes more expensive buildings, more expensive systems. So they have the room in the budget, to your point earlier, Owen, on cost influence. They might say that incremental or that marginal dollar to make the building smarter, even if they don't say the term smarter, that makes a lot of sense. And I've also seen, some startups that have interesting technology like IoT technology seeming to lean into healthcare. One, it's a growing vertical. One, there's aging in just many societies, but it all kind of maps to what you're saying, Eric and Owen.
Yeah, and aging infrastructure as well, right? I think given the state of many verticals, it makes sense to diversify a little bit because I think the themes of each building is a snowflake, an individual is one way to look at it, and that buildings are buildings is the opposite way. I mean, they all have heating and air conditioning and lighting and elevators. And I think, to come around to the original question you asked, which vertical is like ahead, healthcare is way ahead when it comes to experience, and I would say is middling or maybe behind when it comes to physical infrastructure. So I think it's natural that the facilities people and real estate people are pulled into these elevated visioning conversations moving forward. And a lot of times that happens with a master plan or a big new development. So that's where we're looking to make an impact.
Great.
That makes sense.
Owen, what about commercial real estate or corporate real estate, which I think is probably or has been the sweet spot for the Clarient Group?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, initially, I'm just thinking about education actually as an operationally mature market, right? A lot of those higher ed
Mm,
campuses that are well funded are already, delivering a lot of the style of solutions that we would, recommend and be a part of implementing. And we're seeing that sort of take off already. On the office side, I think it's well balanced, I would say, between the two. Back to Joe's point on sort of that prioritized experience front. I would say it definitely leads with that because those are the people that are generating the money for the building. But then operationally, we're seeing things tighten up and with a simpler building, a simpler tool stack, they're able to go a little bit faster, right? So they have the data in these hands. The model has shifted way more to proactive maintenance. And they've been able to do that just because I think they have less stuff to work with.
Okay, that's interesting. And the reason I asked those questions before is because I wanted to get your take on what you think is holding the quote unquote smart building industry back, because you could put it down to um saturation or segmentation or silos. Also, what's been a relatively challenging year for the financial markets, and just budgets have been tightened. Um, but someone who I spoke to a couple of weeks ago said that we are still crossing the chasm of what it actually means to be a smart building and why people want it. And I think with where both of your firms, or now the firm is, you've got different perspectives on, I guess, where we're at, what's holding us back, and what needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of go back where I go in this conversation is around core competency and sort of wearing the hat that you're best suited to wear, right? So we've seen a lot of the market try and do everything, right? For a while, right? There was an explosion of vendors saying they could do everything, right? And then we've seen some maturity of that kind of getting back into the swim lanes, right? But I think to take that even farther, we've seen product companies try and solve the service side on their own, right? And now we're seeing the market realize that there's value to owning, what you're good at, right? So product companies are being truly product companies and they're partnering formally with service providers, right? And that delivery model is a package solution that makes it go faster and cleaner for the owner and the operator, right? So we're really looking to kind of leverage that same model and mindset and almost think of ourselves as maybe that service provider entity and working with products, either in-house at Canon or, partners as the product companies. But that I think has probably held the industry back a little bit, where it's been confusing on, hey, I could do everything. I'm both product and service. And then we realize, you're better at this, right? So um yeah, maybe getting true with like what your identity is helping solve that.
Yeah. Eric, anything to add?
I guess as far as what's holding the industry back, I just having been in a couple of these projects now from early through late, it is just very difficult to get a lot of people on the same page, right? It's a lot of people. We talked about cost estimation. It's people in the early concept phase to say, hey, this is new, this is different, this is why you need a vision, this is why you need perhaps an additional consultant. This is why you need to establish like a middleware layer as part of your budget so that systems are talking to middleware as opposed to each other, call it independent data layer or whatever. And then you get in design, you've got mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers who are used to doing things a certain way, and injecting technology into that is just, not necessarily what they've been practicing for years. And then you get to implementation, and we know that the talking about the people that are operating the buildings, it's another learning curve for them, especially if you're giving them a whole new piece of technology to operate. So, um, we're actually working on our own Chicago office. We made some mistakes that many of our clients have made before, and we had to learn it ourselves. And, I'll just speak me personally, helping lead that project had a lot of things to learn. And so if I was to sum it all up into one thing, it's just educating a whole bunch of different stakeholders about a lot of different complicated pieces of the process that's holding us back, and at the same time the biggest opportunity for us.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. Um, I mean, one other general question we touched on it a little bit, the array of solution providers, the peers of the combined Canon Clarient organization. I would just it's a bit open ended, but just I would be interested in understanding. We're stretching across multiple phases of a building where we're touching on different asset classes that might have different relationships with different types. How do you look at the competitive landscape and maybe where you differentiate?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. The differentiation, I would say, from a consultancy perspective, like if we're talking front end, is that we're leading with um, consultants that are more in tune with the C-suite, right? With the folks that are at the high levels of these organizations, especially as the organization side starts to grow, like healthcare. So we're coming at it from that architecture, planning, consultancy sort of mindset versus others who are like maybe coming out of it more from a traditional kind of engineering mindset, right? So we're leading with almost the business requirements first, and then backing into the technical side of things, right? So that's what I would say the probably biggest differentiator would be.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's great. Eric, yeah.
from a Canon standpoint, I think there's two things. If you're comparing us to other designers, I think smart buildings means different things to different people still. I think there's some designers that have really leaned into the design technology itself. Think about Revit and BIM and where there's going. And I think with the addition of the Clarient Group, we're really leaning into operations and implementation and constructability, and taking things from not only at that beginning design piece, but pulling the thread through to operations. From the engineering side, the second piece, I would say the way we're going about smart buildings and early visioning, a lot of what we've talked today is much bigger than the building management system, right? It's much bigger than even MEP engineering. And I think that there's some, you know, again, it's how do you define smart buildings? If you're defining it as a really robust BMS system, then there's probably an engineering firm that does a really good job at that. If you're defining smart buildings as, the data and intelligence that comes out of these systems of a building, which is more how we see the world, that's how we're marketing ourselves. Oh, and do you have something there?
I would say, like Joe, you hit on it too. Like, our peers and competitors has grown now to a mix of maybe
Yes.
consultants, service providers, but also product companies as well in some capacities, right? And I
Yeah.
think the differentiator, or sort of the value add that we see, especially with the backing of like these groups like digital products, like we were talking about,
Yep.
is we're really looking at these product companies as doing their core job, right? You bring your solution, right? It solves real problems that it's already developed. However, there's insights that these clients are looking for over top of that, that they're hungry for, that they cannot get today from these vendors, because maybe it requires custom development, maybe it requires more effort for them. That's where we see ourselves sort of differentiating, sort of above and beyond, and almost adding sort of this insights layer to a lot of these core solutions that are out there. And that's kind of that like value added service element to it
Yeah.
all. But I would say that that would be a big differentiator.
Yeah. It's funny, we talk often about fragmentation. I especially when you look at like the analytics companies, the software companies, right? There's a lot of fragmentation in it. There's a lot of players, but you could also argue there's a bit of fragmentation in that there's a lot of different, and you touched on this, Owen, there's a lot of different types of companies that are all moving into something tech enabled or smart buildings related, in that it's an extension of what they do. Um, and I think that might persist a little bit, but I also think there's opportunities like you've done between Clarient and Canon to say, we actually want to bring these capabilities and core competencies together.
For sure. Like one use case that's been inspiring, like on the healthcare side, is we've been noodling on how to build up a metric for stress inside a building. Like
Yeah.
how what is the patient's stress score, right? That type of insight isn't being solved necessarily by one vendor today, right?
Right.
So it's bringing that insight, right, using a bunch of enabling technology and solutions. Um, that's the type of
Yeah.
insights we're talking about.
Yeah. The stress, just to build on that, like the stress score may not be I'm hot and the air is stale, but that may be a contributor.
Correct. Yeah, that would be sort of baseline. Yeah, first place to start.
That's super interesting. Final question before we move on to the rapid fire, guys. Let's say we fast forward 12 months. What does success look like post acquisition? Because I imagine you're going to be um, very client facing at a lot of shows, different focused on different things. Obviously, Eric, you talk about healthcare, and we've spoken about Realcom, perhaps even Nexus. Like, is there something that you guys are working towards to ensure that this is a successful acquisition?
Yeah. I'll plug Joe's recent LinkedIn posts as well, and some of the newsletters that are coming out. I think one kind of disclaimer is and Joe's digging into it, is like the change doesn't happen quickly, right? There's not a 3-month sales cycle where everything's going to pop because we added Clarion, or vice versa. I think it's a long-term play, right? This smart buildings has been part of Canon Design strategic framework since 2022. This has happened 3 years later, and I think it's probably smart to look to 3 to 5 years from now to see exactly what kind of impact was made. But to not dodge your question, I think success would be it really starting with education internally, and educating our engineers, our architects, centering around this definition of smart building, which is that it's kind of a malleable definition, and it's not just about the technology that goes in the building, it's about the outcomes, and it's not just the the structured cabling and audio visual, it's the sum of the technology parts. So if we can get aligned internally, and get that message out externally, I think we'll have done our jobs.
Yeah, I agree. I think there it's really we've looked at kind of different parts of the organization as feeder sources, right? And we say we this is a win if we can, receive work, or, get projects from this part of the business or this part, but it's very much this shift in focus towards an internal sell, and educating our clients within, and arming them as client leaders to look at the problems that our clients have out there. So yeah, education first for sure.
Great. Okay, on to rapid fire. Uh, let's start with Eric. Favorite building in the US?
Oh wow, favorite building in the U.S.
I guess it doesn't have to be in the US, but favorite building.
I'll I'll go out on a limb then for my architectural friends, and because Joe expanded to not the U.S. I visited the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona a number of years ago, and it's just incredible. like the architecture as you walk up to it, obviously everything on the inside. I don't even have like a reason or a term for why it was so impressive. It was just kind of a feeling. So I know all architects in our firm could probably appreciate that it's not some teched out building that's actually my favorite, but that's one that comes to mind.
Yeah, they did say that it would never be finished many years ago, but I think it's going to be finished within the next 12 months.
All right.
That's a yeah, great answer. What about you, Owen?
That's a good question. I don't really have like an overall favorite. I've been recently in one of our clients' buildings in Chicago, and it's a it's Salesforce Tower, and they have an amazing brand new building that we helped put a lot of smart tech in, and we're seeing it operate. And just getting to move through the facility and seeing the seamless access and operational aspects, it was pretty inspiring. So yeah, let's do that.
And that building is right at Wolf Point, which is right where the river
It's an incredible
the river comes in, goes north and south. So the views there are among the best views, I would argue, in probably any building you could find.
Eric and I were actually just having coffee there at the top of the building last week, and I we both lived in Chicago actually, and I've never seen a view like that before. So
Right.
it's awesome.
Right.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Jealous. What's your proudest achievement at both firms or either firm?
That's an easy one for me, just because I've kind of sat on both sides and started to kind of kickstart this whole smart buildings thing at Canon. But I would say just this complete life cycle of sort of ideation, incubation, boots on the ground sort of work, while at Canon Design initially there, and then coming over to the Clarient Group and kind of getting pulled back into Canon. So just being a part of that transition, I think, has been a pretty cool process.
Yeah, to piggyback on that. So I came to Canon, and it was like maybe 2 years after Owen had left, maybe more than that, but they all pointed to like this board he had created, and they were like, okay, like this kid Owen did this, and like does it make sense? Where are we going? And I was just very, very impressed. So Owen laid the groundwork for everything that we're hearing today. So definitely second his answer there. I'll say for myself, um actually it's not necessarily with Canon. It's the founding of the Building Intelligence Group here in Charlotte. I've been pretty involved with the group, and just I mentioned earlier, I'm a people person. I want to get in front of different people and hear their perspectives. And the group that we've grown here in Charlotte is, we've had an event that had 60 plus people. We had a trivia event with 8 or 10 different teams. We've got a lot of momentum here locally, and it brings me a lot of pride and joy to go to events and learn new perspectives and just hear people that say like, oh, this is such a unique and novel group. Like, I'm really happy I'm here. There's people from AV and BMS and all sorts of different sectors. So that's been a great outlet for myself.
Yeah, you've done a really good job with that. I love how these rapid fire questions as well, Joe. They never they never mean rapid fire answers either. It's good.
Yeah, we are not very I listen to some podcasts and they say in 2 words or in 1 word. We don't do that. But
Yeah.
go ahead.
Final question from my end. If you could, what would you change about the smart buildings industry?
I don't.
No one rush.
My initial response is I like it messy, right? I like it. I like it the way it
Yeah.
is. Eric started talking about the people. We started talking about the market fragmentation. I mean, let's be frank. We all get a lot of energy out of this chaos, right? So I think my answer is I like it the way it is, and I'm interested to see where it goes. I'm excited to be on the journey, but I don't have anything that I have necessarily beef with today.
Got it.
My answer
Eric,
would,
anything to add? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's interesting to think about the network as competitors, right? Um, like technically all of us are trying to talk to a lot of the same clients about some of the similar things. But at the same time, I feel like we're all like in it together, trying to fight to make technology prioritize and to make buildings run better. And, I have conversations with many people like you two, and we're on the same page and fighting the same fight. So maybe what I'd change is just a less competitive feeling with people that are just generally in the same boat and trying to make buildings better.
That makes sense. Um, Smart home tech, do you have any favorite devices at your house?
I am still trying to set up 2 years later my Ecobee successfully. And that might be a knock on me personally. However, I just
Yeah.
had a HVAC tech come out and the control board is apparently messed up and the old Honeywell thermostat can turn the fan off, but the new Ecobee can't. I don't have an answer yet. And maybe that echoes some of our clients' frustrations. So I instead answered least favorite.
However,
I will say when I first installed our Ecobee at our house 3 or 4 years ago, they have excellent tech support, or they did at the time. I mean, maybe they still do over WhatsApp. You could just WhatsApp a number and it was like send us photos because the control board in my case, I had to rewire a few of the points in the control board to, it wasn't that complicated. It was just understanding. But yeah, I also know there are cases where certain types of HVAC systems, it's hard to use certain types of thermostats.
Yeah, feel free to cut this part, but I spent a good hour on Chat GPT trying to go back and forth and like upgraded my plan and sent pictures of the wiring to try to diagnose it.
Yeah.
It wasn't helpful. I had to teach it instead of the reverse, but it was
Yeah.
interesting. It was a good experience.
But that's where we're going. I think the augmentation, right? Person plus tech. Oh, Owen, what about you in terms of favorite smart home tech or just notable smart home tech?
Um, I don't have a ton. I actually heat my house in the winter with a wood stove. So, we're kind of the other end of the spectrum over here in my house, but
Yeah,
we have a Nest. It does its thing. But
yeah,
yeah, I don't have a ton of like nerdy preferences on the smart home stuff quite yet. But
fair.
yeah.
okay, cool. Well, Owen, Eric, really appreciate your time, and it's great to unpack all things Canon design and the Clarient Group. All the best over the next year or so, and hopefully we see you guys in person soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, gents.
Absolutely. Great to see you guys. Thanks so much for
Thanks for
having me.
having us. See you soon.